All right, now I'd like welcome to the show Stephen Perkins, Chief Operating Officer for the American Conservation Coalition. Welcome to Free the Economy, Stephen.
Thanks for having me.
So, first up, if there are a few people living under rocks out there who are not familiar with ACC, tell us a little bit about the organization and how you came to be part of it.
So we were started in 2017, a group of millennials, which was the youngest generation really at that time. A group of millennials said, "Hey, climate and energy and conservation, these are issues that are really important to our peers in this generation, and we are conservatives, and we're noticing that conservatives are not talking about these things. They don't have a place at the table." And we knew that the consequence would be that if one side doesn't have a seat at the table, some pretty disastrous policy is going to come out of that. So we said, let's work for however long it takes to get a seat at the table and sort of change the narrative around these traditionally left wing issues. And so we've done that. We're now coming up on just about 8 years of doing that, and we not only have been able to change that narrative, we've grown our membership to almost 100,000. Will be 100,000 young people across the country by the end of this year. We now represent Gen Z, the newest, freshest generation that votes. And we really, the focus is both grassroots activation, educate communities, get them involved, be part of the solution, really push that local control and involvement side, but also on the national scale, advance really important solutions such as nuclear permitting, and building massive new projects in this country again, making sure that we're competitive on the global stage.
Now, you had a great article that was published recently in Real Clear Energy, and it was titled "All of the Above Energy" or "Best of the Above: Conservatives' Way Forward." And so that was about ongoing debate over which types of energy production policymakers should be prioritizing in the US, so oil and gas versus nuclear versus wind and solar and so forth. Short version, why do we need all of the above?
The short version of why we need all of the above is for the same reason that you would want to diversify your investment portfolio. You want to have options. You want to have different diversified sources of energy to keep the grid strong, to help communities prosper. I think you and me and your audience would agree that more energy equals more prosperity. That's also something Secretary of Energy Chris Wright has been saying. And so we need more energy, period. And we shouldn't just limit ourselves to, the energy of our grandparents that we know and love. And that's important, right? We need those boring bonds just as much as we need the new Bitcoin investment.
So, two of our previous guests here in the show, Andre Beliveau from episode 45 and Gabrielle Hoffman from 117, both fine Americans and smart policy analysts. They wrote an article in December last year, which also appeared in Real Clear Energy, as it turns out, titled "To Achieve American Energy Dominance, Trump Must Avoid All of the Above Rhetoric." So, so they argue against what they call a vague but well-intentioned slogan and a hollow talking point. So that obviously seems to be in opposition to your take, but I kind of wonder how much it really is. So, when you wrote, we shouldn't support every energy source simply for the sake of inclusivity or box checking. And I feel like that's kind of the attitude Andre and Gabriella have as well, right? One of the things that they're opposed to, and that we the especially the U.S. federal government, federal energy policy shouldn't be bending over backwards to accommodate certain energy sources just because they are sort of politically popular or trendy, or it's what environmentalists think is the coolest, newest thing. So I wonder if there's actually as much disagreement here as maybe as it seems like there is, or if these sort of all of the above, anti all of the above people maybe agree on more than it seems like they do.
I think there is some more agreement there. What I will just say broadly about the energy debate right now, we're running out of time. We have incredible energy demands that are only compounding every single week. And so I don't think a debate about what slogan we're going to use is the most important use of our time, when I'd rather us just go out and build things where they make sense when they make sense. What I will say about the argument that government shouldn't bend over backwards and prioritize one form or the other, the opposite is also true. The government shouldn't bend over backwards to deprioritize something that is working as well. And so, for example, here in Texas, I would say, are one of the best, if not the best, models about a diversified energy mix. Unfortunately, our state legislature over the past couple of sessions has been trying to curtail the progress of wind and solar. And sort of the poisonous thing they've done is they've tried to do it on private land, which doesn't go over very well here, as you can imagine. But I never understood why we would focus our energy on trying to get rid of certain forms of energy that, yes, right now, may not be as cost effective as oil and gas, but they are keeping ranches in families. They are empowering local economies that maybe don't have an oil industry. They are adding to the overall reliability of the state's grid. So I never understood why the focus would be on deprioritizing certain energy forms when we should be focused on energy addition, not energy subtraction. And I think the debate over which slogan or which kind of theoretical approach we take is just wasting time when we should all be united. I think we all are united in innovating, going out there and pushing forward a diverse mix that is going to get us through these next few decades of immense growth.
Yeah, so that I mean that's something that I think I've worried about a lot in that the idea of the perfect being the enemy of the good, and that's true whether it's the climate activist definition of what's a perfect energy mix or the drill baby drill conservatives definition of perfection. Um, and I think you're kind of right there about the idea about like running out of time to that if we have too narrow a definition of what the best power source is, we might end up in a situation where, especially if we have this sort of like ideologically or partisan polarized version of like all the blue team is for these three energy sources and all the red team is for these three energy sources, and we just keep fighting over it for indefinitely into the future. We have we could see a future where when the Democrats are in charge, every oil and gas project that's under development gets canceled. And then when Republicans are in charge, every like wind and solar project gets canceled. So, especially in an environment where it takes many years, many too many in many cases, to permit and plan energy infrastructure, then we end up with a long-term planning process where there are no viable projects at all, right? Which is
Yep.
the worst of all such situations.
Yeah, and right now the reality is that traditional forms of energy, I mean, there is still a permitting process and a time to get it done, but it's done so much quicker, right? It takes so much longer to, I think the greatest example is a nuclear plant. And I'm all for some level of regulation. I don't want just rogue nuclear plants, although my dream is a modular reactor in every backyard. But it shouldn't take a decade plus to build something new in this country. And to your point, there shouldn't be, this is one of the also one of the challenges of setting energy policy by executive order and not through congressional legislation or even better state level legislation or agency reform. The challenge is that you just flip flop back and forth between what energy the government is favoring at the time. And I would argue that the government should not be favoring anything, right? They should not be picking winners or losers. The signals as well that it sends to the market is just to stop investment, stop innovation. The reason that we're so behind other countries, but also just behind the benchmark in nuclear technology. And thankfully, a lot of startups and other companies are getting us back up speed. But the reason we're so behind is because of government policy against nuclear since the 70s, right?
Mhm.
And so the government got in the way, slowed everything down. And now we're trying to catch up because people are waking up and realizing, oh, nuclear is actually not that bad, and we should be investing in it. And now, unfortunately, the reigning attack on nuclear is, well, it's just too expensive and it's going to take too long. But, gee, I wonder how that happened.
Well, yeah, and I feel like the part of the polarization that has come, you see this sort of polarization on every issue, but including on energy and environmental issues, which is, well, the other side went too far when they had power in this area. So now, in order to balance things out, we're going to go too far in the
Yeah.
opposite direction, rather than saying, well, there's a sensible policy that will actually get us where we want to go, and then we should commit to that. Um, you know, when the new Trump team first came in, there was the news stories about the Biden team trying to rush out a bunch of uh, you know renewable subsidies, and then climate policy money and funding out the door. And when Lee Zeldin at EPA came in, and they there was this sort of report that the outgoing Biden people were trying to throw gold bars off the Titanic, right? They were trying to get as much of this sort of like federal taxpayer money out to left-wing policy priorities as possible, and they didn't necessarily follow the rules, and they were, not doing it honestly. And so I feel like for some of the people, whether it's actual Trump administration people or it's sort of, Republicans and conservatives in general, they feel like, oh, well, the Biden administration overreached on the climate activists industrial complex. So now we have to like fight them any way we possibly can. And that means, cancel every windmill, right? That's been built in the past 10 years. I wonder, is there a path to kind of normalizing this and saying like, wait, we don't have to keep going too far in opposite directions every 4 years. We need to just say, we have a short list of things that are good for the American people and stick to that.
I'm hopeful of that, and I think that it ultimately lays upon the responsibilities of Congress, which is sort of a scary thought nowadays. But they have a lot of work to do in sort of regulating that dialogue or normalizing that dynamic. You know, for example, I think permitting reform and committing to a transmission investment are great uses of Congress's time. But I think you're right that there's always going to be a little bit of back and forth and overcorrecting from when administration kind of changes parties. I would also say the best defense against that is, let's stop putting so much power in the federal hands. Let's let the market be our regulator of that. Let's let states prioritize the things that they want to prioritize. You'll still have some more back and forth, but when those sort of decisions become more localized, they are less likely to mirror just the whims of the moment. And I think, again, using Texas as the example, I think it's this way with a lot of state legislators, where our state legislatures, when you look at the media coverage of them, you see, oh, these legislatures are divided, and here's all these crazy things they're putting out there. When you go into the gallery and you watch the day to day of the state legislatures, they are quite tame. They work on a lot more together than they work against each other on. And so I think some of the reasons that in Texas we've been able to fight back against some of these really disastrous proposals for our energy grid are because the overwhelming consensus among Texans is, we want more energy. We want to remain a competitive state. And I think that goes the same for Americans. We want low energy costs. We want a diverse energy grid, and we want it to be reliable, right? I mean, that's the only time that the American people think about energy is when they're filling up, or when they flip a switch and the light doesn't come on. They want it to be there, and they want it to be reliable, and they want it to be affordable, to where when they get that bill, it's not a huge strain on the finances. And I think when you bring it more localized, and when you let markets do what markets do well, those whims of the moment, those overcorrections start to become less and less. They start to correct themselves.
Yeah, and I feel like this debate over which we've been having for literally for decades, I know because I've been around for at least 25 years of it, is over whether we as a country or policymakers or Congress or whoever is supposedly in charge of doing this at any given moment, whether we should emphasize more wind and solar versus more sort of like natural gas for electricity generation, for example. The debate is like, oh, well, wind and solar is getting cheaper, or wind and solar is already cheaper. And then some people say, oh, well, that doesn't account for the lack of reliability and baseload capacity. So if you correct for that, then it's actually more expensive. And so we keep having these sort of policy debates about which is more or less expensive, but we don't have those debates about which type of bread is more expensive or which type of hot dogs are more expensive, right? Because the people who produce it take the risk of producing it and then they sell it, right? But the reason why I think so many people feel like we need to argue about this when it comes to electricity generation is because there are billions of dollars of taxpayer subsidies involved, and
Yeah.
so we feel like, oh, well, we're all taxpayers, so we all get to have an opinion about this, and we should like normalize our policy decisions based on that. So if we, like you were saying, if we had more market-based energy and the companies that were investing, making these admittedly extremely large investments for new energy infrastructure generating capacity, um, I think if people felt safer that the people making the money and making those bets were going to like suffer the results of it, and we're not going to be bailed out by taxpayers, then we wouldn't have to constantly debate who should be allowed to build what thing. We should just say, hey, if you're a big energy company and you decide if the numbers pencil out for you to build wind, build some wind, right? Buy the land, file your hopefully short permit, knock yourself out, right? If you make money, great. If not, it's you're on the hook, right? Um, do you think that is sort of like a message that could resonate that like, well, if we had fewer billions in taxpayer subsidies, we wouldn't have to fight about gas versus wind versus whatever quite as much.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of layers there. I agree that that issue in and of itself is correct. And I think our end goal should be to have a less subsidized energy market. With that said, a few caveats to it. Number one, when you build anything in this country, even if there is zero taxpayer money going to, you still have the scrutiny of the community which you build it in, right? And one of the things that we've seen here in Texas is I own land and my neighbor has land and he puts a wind turbine up and I don't like the way that looks and I can see it from my land. And so that's a problem. And there was a bill last session that I characterize it as wanting to create a statewide HOA, where essentially, if your neighbor had an issue with your turbine or with any sort of energy project, they could have it. They could basically appeal that. So that's always a layer you have to be cognizant of. It's not going to be a perfect utopia if you take away taxpayer credits, because you still have your neighbor or a community that may not like that nuclear power station being built or may not like that oil well or that turbine. The other thing that I think about, and I'll preface and say I don't have a perfect answer to it. There is a bit of a global competition going on with energy development right now. And when you look at countries like China, or you look at countries like France, and I would maybe put them in similar categories. But when you look at them, why have they been able to build France is overwhelmingly powered by nuclear power now.
Mhm.
China's been building a lot of nuclear plants as well as coal plants. Why are they able to do that so quickly and so efficiently? Well, in China, you have their benefit of not having an executive that changes every 4 years, so they don't have to go back and forth between policy. But in France, these are all government-run nuclear power plants, right? So it's a lot easier in many ways to get that done. I'm not suggesting that we need government-run energy facilities, but what I'm suggesting is the comparison of when you look at what taxpayer money can do, tax credits can do, it can serve and often does serve as a jumpstart investment from the federal government for new technologies to get things up to speed. When it comes to nuclear energy, I absolutely believe we need federal investment in nuclear technology, and the permitting process needs to go down, right? Like the federal government needs to be very involved in that right now, but then they need to eventually very quickly turn that over to companies to do the actual innovation, to do the building, to do the management, because that's what they are best to do. So there's a lot of layers to that tax credit discussion. But I think, what we should aspire to. The final point I'll make is I've talked with legislators about this as well, and they say, well, look at all the tax credits wind or solar get. Let's not pretend oil and gas don't get tax subsidies either. They've been highly subsidized for generations now. And so, if you really want a level playing field, make it level, but know what that means.
Well, yeah, I think of also the possibility for transitioning from one format to another. I was at the American Nuclear Society's annual conference a couple of years back, and Joe Manchin was there, and they were talking about um, moving from coal to nuclear, which I thought was an interesting idea.
Yeah.
The idea that there are places in the country where there have been coal-powered power plants for a long time, and so those power plants obviously have long-standing incumbent grandfathered in connections to the electrical grid and everything. There's a bunch of infrastructure already built out there. All the rights of way are there. And the suggestion was that, well, if we are transitioning away from coal in a long-term sense, um, excuse me, even though the current administration seems to be pining for a coal renaissance, but look at the past 100 years, right? We're transitioning away from coal in general, and it has been a commonplace talking point, right, for decades that there are coal-dependent communities that are being left behind, that are hollowed out, that are having all sorts of demographic problems. Uh, One thing that you could do is uh, take the coal-fired power plant, pull it out, and plug in a nuclear facility exactly in its place, and it will generate power in the same place the coal plant generated power, and it will have all of these kind of like already grandfathered in connections that you don't need a 20-year permit process to create, and that is a sort of like creative new pivot way that we can think about uh, supporting kind of rust belt communities, but also moving forward with energy. What do you think about a strategy like that?
I love that strategy. I think it makes so much sense. I think the number, and we may have to fact check it, but I think the number is something like 80% of a coal facility's existing infrastructure can be converted over to be used for nuclear.
Mhm.
And then also because they are sort of similar operations, the talent that worked in that coal plant can also be retrained to work a nuclear plant. So you're talking about the preservation of jobs, you're talking about the preservation of existing infrastructure and, sort of updating it. It's obviously a cost and a timeline to it, but much quicker and cheaper than building completely new plants. The challenge though becomes, let's say these are a bunch of coal plants in West Virginia and we're going to transition over nuclear. That's great and all, but then we need the transmission to carry that energy out to the rest of the country. And so I think a double-handed approach of let's transition as many of those as we can, along with let's increase our transmission infrastructure in this country. That's such a low-hanging fruit that we should be doing that all over the country. It would be an incredible campaign for federal government to promote and for state governments to help lead as well.
Yeah, and I'm also, I mean, thinking about what you said about sort of wanting to have a diverse kind of portfolio of energy sources in this country, so we don't have all our eggs in one basket, and that we want as many generating assets as possible. So I was thinking about this recently, looking at plans in places like California and New York, where they want to electrify everything, right? They want wind and solar only electricity generation in the long term, but they also want home and even like commercial power to only be coming from electricity rather than natural gas. And in some places, they're already saying, well, you can't build new apartments with natural gas appliances. Everything has to be electric, right? Um, but then I also think about what happens when there's a storm or a natural disaster and the lights go out. People who have gas heating and cooking and people who have gas generators, including commercial facilities, can keep going under those conditions. But if everyone is relying only on electricity for everything, then they're out of luck when that power goes out. And and I think about this even with another topic that's like big in the climate policy area, which is eliminating internal combustion engines. So if everyone's car and their individual, as well as fleet vehicles, are only electrical and only electrical, when the grid goes down now, at least you can still drive somewhere, right? There's still gas stations. But in an all electrical future, we would be kind of like dead in the water. So, I wonder what you think about that as sort of a diversity as resiliency, but also even as like a national security concern, right? Because if
Yeah.
if like someday the Chinese Communist Party takes down our grid and literally everything we depend on is electric powered only, that seems like a significant vulnerability.
Huge risk, yeah, which is why, best of luck to California and New York. I have no intention of living there ever. But they will see why that is such a disastrous proposal. It's sort of a similar thing before the just 100% reliance on wind and solar. They would say, well, we want to electrify everything and then not acknowledge that that electricity would be coming from oil and gas primarily right now, right? Natural gas a lot. The other challenge with that national security piece is really important. But also, as we saw here, as we've seen here in Texas, we are about to surpass, I believe it is California, in battery storage. So one of the things that I feel like I keep adding new things we need to invest in, but battery storage is important to help with that reliability as well. Batteries are getting, these massive industrial energy storage batteries are getting very good. And so in a state like Texas, where I feel like we have a great model of the all of the above approach, having that battery backup will help us for future winter storms, which we get once every 10 years, or future, future challenges, maybe even if it does become a grid attack. Um, you know, uh, um, so that's an important piece to that as well. But I agree that the idea that 100% of it will be powered by wind and solar may be in those states, but I don't think those states have enough land to put. I mean, unless you're blanketing the entire countryside in wind turbines and solar panels. And I don't think I don't even think the most liberal, hippie wants to look out their window and just see solar panels. So I often will say, like, make the math, because it doesn't add up when you say that everything will be renewable power. The idea of baseload energy, you need those massive always on energy sources: oil, natural gas, nuclear energy, hydro in a sense, geothermal can provide some of that. Wind and solar cannot provide that.
Well, yeah, I mean, California needs lots of room for high-speed trains that don't go anywhere. So,
Yeah.
we need to make sure everything's available. Uh, and so, as I certainly know from the think tank and policy advocacy space, uh, it's great to have good ideas, but it's also important to have people with some authority listening to your ideas and supporting them. And so I was, I've been looking at the big project that ACC had over, I guess, it was over the summer, the Energy Freedom Tour, right, where you guys are traveling around and talking to people, going to college campuses. Um, including along with the support of some of our most prominent cabinet secretaries, people you've already mentioned, like Secretary of Energy Chris Wright or Doug Burgum at Interior, and of course Interior has a lot to do with energy permitting because federal lands are involved. Um, how has that gone? Is that exciting? Is it fun? What what is it? What does it kind of mean to for for people like you and your colleagues to share a stage with the people who are hopefully have their hands on some kind of levers of influence here.
It's huge, and it's been exciting to have cabinet secretaries involved. So Friday, I'm not sure exactly when this episode comes out, but this Friday we'll be at Stanford with Secretary Burgum. Later in November, we'll be at Texas A&M with Secretary Brooke Rollins of Ag. And then it'll continue into next year on a number of campuses across the country. So it's important because for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's great to have the cabinet secretaries, come on the record in front of a mostly, young audience who are concerned about this, right? Whether they consider themselves to be liberal or non-political or conservative or whatever, they still want, what we hear on campus is that students are still oddly very interested in our energy future. And so it's helpful to hear cabinet secretaries talk about that. The sort of complementary to that, having students, ask their questions and put their priorities forward are important to the cabinet secretaries. That's why they're doing this. They want to be hearing that feedback. And at the same time, we're also trying to show that there's sort of a job and professional development component of this as well. We've launched a job, the Legacy Center, a job board for careers in energy and conservation, and we're trying to show that energy jobs isn't just going out to an oil well and being a field worker there. But there's a lot of interesting avenues for people to be involved in the future of our energy, really, regardless of whatever your major or your interests are. There's some role in energy that ties into that, and so it's been exciting. It's still going on, and we're excited for to you know to see the reaction to it as it goes on.
Well, yeah, as I know, there's some great jobs out there in the energy industry. My own father worked in natural gas for 43 years, so it puts food on the table. Let me tell you.
Yeah,
Um, all right, Stephen, this has been an excellent conversation. I'm so excited. I'm so glad I saw your piece on Real Clear Energy again. All of the above energy, or best of the above, conservatives way forward. Before we go, where can people find all your excellent work and professional stuff online?
yeah. So as far as my organization, ACC.eco and ACC National on all of socials, we're always putting out some stuff. We also have a very exciting publication launching soon, so stay tuned in this space. And then I'm on social media at Stephen_Perkins. And yeah, I really enjoy these conversations. I always like talking with you about it. It gets me out of my comfort zone a little bit to talk with actual policy people because I'm not a policy person, but I certainly, work in the space. And so this has been great. I appreciate it, Richard.
All right. Thanks for being with us, Stephen.